You weren't too much. They were too little. What if everything they called excess, your intensity, your sensitivity, your fire, wasn't a flaw, but a frequency they couldn't handle? What if your pain was never about being too big, but about trying to survive in rooms built for smaller versions of you? Most people aren't trained to hold depth. They flinch when you speak truth. They squint when you shine. So they shame what they can't digest, and you end up calling your brilliance a burden. But here's the twist. The problem was never you. It was the shrinking, the self-betrayal, the aching need to be liked in a world terrified of realness. In this video, we're not just unpacking why people called you too much. We're dismantling that label, piece by piece, and revealing the power hidden inside it. Because the very traits that got you excluded are the same ones that hold your gift. And it's time you stopped apologizing for what makes you radiant. The label of too much. They say you're too sensitive, too intense, too emotional. But those words, they're not mirrors of who you are. They're windows into the emotional limitations of the ones pointing fingers. Carl Jung would call this a projection of the shadow. People label what they cannot process. In a society that idolizes numbness and labels depth as dysfunction, those who feel deeply often end up gaslighting their own inner life. The psyche, rich with archetypes and vivid energies, becomes reduced to something inconvenient. And that's where the distortion begins. Think about it. A child who cries too loudly, laughs too hard, or questions too much often learns not how to feel, but how to shrink. That's not upbringing. That's emotional suppression dressed up as socialization. This is how philosophy gets stripped from the art of living. We stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, how can I stop being this way? What we call adaptation is sometimes just a sophisticated form of self-rejection. The mind, seeking connection, learns to disown its own brilliance to stay safe. Now here's the real twist. Those who carry this intensity are often the ones holding unspoken wisdom. Their inner dialogue is alive with conscience and depth. They notice shifts in energy others ignore. They read silence like a sentence. But because they were labeled too much, they second-guess their own mind. They start editing their essence in real time, toning down empathy, censoring insight, minimizing presence, just so no one feels uncomfortable. But is that really living? You'll see it in adulthood. The person who apologizes before speaking, the artist who hides their sketchbook, the friend who never cries in front of anyone. Behind every act of restraint, there's usually a history of judgment. They've been taught that their light is too bright, that their truth makes people squint, so they learn to dim. But here's the catch. When you repress energy, it doesn't vanish. It twists, it aches, it becomes shadow. Carl Jung didn't just theorize this. He felt it in the human soul. And maybe that's why so many intense, radiant, heart-on-fire people walk around feeling like aliens. Not because they're broken, but because they were never meant to blend. They were born to break patterns, not fit them. And yet, they've spent a lifetime trying to be less vibrant, less wise, less alive. But what if the pain isn't in being too much? What if the pain is in pretending not to be? Maybe the very thing they've been repressing is the doorway to a deeper kind of power. High sensitivity as a misunderstood power. To be highly sensitive isn't to be fragile, it's to be finely tuned. While others skim the surface of life, those with high sensitivity dive headfirst into its undercurrents. They feel before logic kicks in. They sense truths hiding behind polite smiles. In a world obsessed with productivity and numbness, this capacity is often mislabeled as weakness. But let's be clear, this isn't about fragility. It's about an exquisite sensitivity to energy, vibration, and truth. Carl Jung would call it proximity to the unconscious, a deeper channel to the collective psyche. Here's the paradox. Those who feel the most are often told they're broken, when in fact, they're healers in disguise. Sensibility doesn't mean you're incapable. It means your antennae are picking up what most people ignore. Ever walked into a room and felt the tension before a word was said? That's not imagination. That's inner wisdom. That's the mind tapping into layers of meaning, context, and unspoken pain. Psychoanalysis would argue this is advanced processing, not dysfunction. But society rarely builds space for such minds. The classroom punishes the child who cries too easily. The office silences the one who raises uncomfortable truths. And so, the sensitive retreat, not because they're weak, but because they're exhausted. Exhausted from navigating a world that doesn't honor empathy, that labels intensity as instability. They start to internalize this false narrative. They call themselves too much, when in truth, they're too real for a world addicted to masks. And yet, this sensitivity is the birthplace of art, of intuition, of compassion. It's the root of creativity and the spark of true connection. Many of the world's most powerful visionaries, Van Gogh, Jung himself, Frida Kahlo, channeled this intensity into expression. That's the key, expression. When sensitivity is denied, it becomes pain. But when it's honored, it becomes power. So read poetry, paint your ache, meditate, practice expressive journaling. Give form to the formless inside you. Because rejecting your sensibility is like cutting off your own wings. It severs you from the very essence that makes your experience rich, wise, and impactful. The world doesn't need you to be tougher. It needs you to be truer. And the irony? The more you own your sensitivity, the more it transforms from burden into brilliance. But only if you stop asking for permission to feel and start recognizing that maybe you were never meant to fit into a world built to suppress the soul. The pain of not belonging. There's a specific kind of ache that comes from walking through life feeling like an outsider. It's not just about being different. It's about knowing you see things others pretend not to. People with rich inner lives, shaped by conscience, intensity, and shadow work, often carry a quiet grief, the grief of being unseen. Carl Jung would call this the loneliness of individuation, the path where you stop conforming and start becoming. But the first step on that path often feels like exile. They try to belong. They study how others speak, dress, react. They mimic the rhythms of the crowd, hoping someone will finally say, "You fit." But authenticity doesn't wear masks well. And so they oscillate between adapting and shrinking, between truth and camouflage. That conflict erodes the self. The mind begins to wonder, maybe I'm the problem. And from that thought, they slowly trade their essence for approval. It's not survival. It's spiritual starvation disguised as socialization. Let me tell you something radical. Not belonging isn't a flaw. It's a sign. A message from your soul that you weren't meant to play small. Many who carry inner light, creatives, empaths, thinkers, are born allergic to superficiality. They feel alien in conversations that avoid depth. They sense falseness in rituals of conformity. Their discomfort is not dysfunction. It's data. It's the psyche's way of whispering. You are not here to blend. You are here to awaken. But that awareness doesn't make the loneliness easier. Some nights still feel hollow. Some rooms still echo with absence. That's real. But that space, if you let it, can become sacred. A silence where you finally hear your own voice. A gap where you build belonging from the inside out. Read authors who reflect your experience. Clarissa Pinkola Estés, James Hollis, Bell Hooks. Engage in practices that honor solitude. Walks in nature, contemplative writing, dream analysis. Not to escape people, but to reclaim yourself. Because at some point, you realize the crowd you've been trying to impress is lost. And the loneliness you feared is actually the threshold to your own identity. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because once you stop trying to belong where you were never meant to, you begin to attract those who truly see you. And in that moment, everything shifts, not because the world changes, but because you do. The repression of personal radiance. From a young age, many are taught, explicitly or silently, that their light is dangerous. If you shine too bright, you'll attract envy. If you speak too passionately, you'll be too much. So what do? They dim. They whisper instead of roar. They edit themselves down to what's tolerable for others. And just like that, the mind learns that authenticity equals punishment. Carl Jung understood this as the repression of the self, when our brilliance becomes a liability rather than a gift. Think about it. How many children were told, "Don't act out," when all they did was show joy? How many teens were mocked for dreaming too big or loving too deeply? That pain doesn't vanish. It morphs into inhibition. Suddenly, timidity isn't a personality trait. It's a trauma response. Silence becomes armor. Retraction becomes safety. But beneath that self-censorship lives a volcano of unexpressed energy, creativity, emotion, truth, all locked in shadow, waiting to breathe. And here's the kicker. Repressing your light doesn't just protect others from discomfort. It disconnects you from your own power. That's where the slow, inner ache comes from. The subtle self-betrayal. You say yes when you mean no. You nod politely while your soul screams. And with every act of betrayal, the self dissolves a little more. That's not adaptation, it's erosion. Psychoanalysis would call this a fragmentation of identity, a split between the public mask and the inner truth. But there's a way back. Not easy, but honest. Start with tiny acts of expression. Share an opinion you usually hide, or something that reflects your essence. Tell someone what you really feel. It'll be terrifying at first, because every expression risks judgment, but it also invites expansion. And slowly, the body remembers, I'm allowed to be seen. That's not ego, it's reclamation. You're not showing off, you're showing up. And that, in a repressive world, is radical. So maybe the question was never, how do I stop being too much? Maybe it was always, who taught me that being whole was wrong? Because your radiance isn't the problem. It's the proof. The proof that even in a culture addicted to dimness, there are still souls who are born to light fires. And those fires, once lit, don't burn bridges. They burn cages. Liberation through authentic expression. Real healing doesn't begin when others finally accept you. It begins when you stop needing their permission to be who you are. When someone who spent a lifetime being too much finally reclaims their voice, something sacred happens. Carl Jung would call it a reunion with the self, the re-emergence of the authentic spirit buried under layers of adaptation and fear. The mind no longer orbits around approval. It begins to center itself in truth. And truth, once embodied, becomes impossible to unsee. Expression isn't about performance. It's about coherence. When your outer life matches your inner dialogue, you generate energy, alignment, power. Suddenly, the same traits that were once criticized, your sensitivity, your intensity, your depth, become your compass. The world may still flinch at your truth, but you don't. You stand taller. You speak clearer. You write, dance, create, share, not for validation, but for liberation. Because you've tasted the prison of silence, and you're not going back. Let's get practical. Want to begin expressing more authentically? Try expressive journaling every morning. No filters, no edits, just raw stream of consciousness. Practice saying one true thing a day that you usually avoid. Join a class where you can create, painting, poetry, storytelling. These aren't hobbies. They're rituals of remembrance. They reconnect the fragmented self. They convert shame into story, fear into fire. They remind you, You don't exist to be palatable. You exist to be real. And here's the beauty of it. As you expand, your world recalibrates. People who once judged you drift away, not because you changed, but because your clarity made their masks uncomfortable. But in their place, others arrive. People who crave depth, people who speak energy, people who see you. That's the magic of authenticity. It doesn't just free you, it calls in those who are always waiting for your truth to ring like a bell in the dark. So let them say you're too much. Let them whisper and flinch. That label they gave you, it was never a flaw. It was always a forecast, a sign that your very existence unsettles a world that thrives on repression. And now, you stopped hiding. Now, you've remembered. Now, you've begun something irreversible. And what comes next might just be the version of you they were never ready for. You've spent years contorting yourself into shapes that don't fit, quieting your voice, shrinking your soul, and mistaking suppression for survival. But here's the truth. The world never needed a diluted version of you. It needed you, whole, loud, raw, and unedited. So what are you going to do with this awareness now? Will you keep hiding behind fear and labels? Or will you finally let your essence break the surface and breathe? Ask yourself, where in your life are you still dimming your light just to be tolerated? Who taught you to fear your own power? And why are you still obeying that lesson? These aren't just questions. They're doorways. And the moment you walk through them, everything changes. Because healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to tone it down. If this video stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Apply what you felt. Speak your truth. Take up space. And if you're ready to keep unlocking these deeper layers of your mind and soul, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. There's a whole universe inside you, and we're just getting started.